Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Our next talk is by Phil England. Phil England's a lead security consultant and a skilled penetration tester who holds multiple certificates from the UK Pen Testing Authority, CREST. He's worked on a number of simulated attacks for Bank of England, UK government, and a variety of data centers. And over the past 10 years, his work has spanned a variety of sectors, from finance to nuclear power, military systems, and various departments across the governments of the US, the UK, South Africa, and Australia. And with that, I'll turn it over to Phil.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Roberta. Can everyone hear me? I'll carry on. Cool. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. My name is Phil England. It's great to be here today, virtually though. Got an unusually sunny day here in England, which is very nice and strange for us. I'd like to thank you all in advance for listening to my talk. During my years as a penetration tester, I've always focused more on infrastructure than web applications. So I've seen plenty of networks throughout the years, some good, some bad, but all different. I was fortunate enough to be part of a response team when Heartbleed was discovered. For those of you who may not know, there was an overflow condition where some of the OpenSSL process memory was returned in responses. In isolation, you might get lucky and hit on plaintext credentials as they pass through the process, but by making multiple requests and combining them, it was possible to retrieve the private key used during the encryption. Decryption of all traffic was then possible once you had this key. Discussing this with a colleague recently, it was kind of like one of the first store now, decrypt later attacks. If you'd captured traffic to a vulnerable server, then it could be decrypted easily using the stolen key. Now, I'm not sure on the timelines, but I think,
to be honest, cryptography has never come naturally to me. I know enough to do the kind of work that I do, but every bit of crypto knowledge I have is hard won.
sorry, I've got another
comes to censorship,
voice.
Contributed to a lot of major internet censorship circumvention systems and have done a lot of research understanding the behavior and habits of real world sensors. Okay, button, great. Part of this talk is just sort of general outreach because I want to show people the sort of potentials of this field.
There's another talk in my ear.
Graphic expertise and more cryptographic involvement. So really, I'm trying to serve a few different purposes with this talk. One is that I want to show you some rather cool attacks that have happened against deployed and important censorship circumvention protocols. These are.
I can hear a talk about censorship protocols.
I think these attacks are not very well known, and I just think they're interesting and more people should know about them. I also want to talk about fully encrypted protocols, or FEPs. It's a really cool topic that I just want to talk more about.
Do you want me to try and continue? Not sure if I can mute it on my side.
A censorship threat model. I want to give you an introduction to censorship threat modeling as someone who's experienced or knowledgeable about cryptography.
Did that help?
And especially to help you get
No, I can still hear it.
Or some of the early misconceptions that I've seen people have when they start doing research in this field. So I want you to be able to get started, hit the ground running if you're interested in doing this kind of stuff.
That sounds like it's gone now. Cool. Yeah, sounds like it's gone. Brilliant. Thank you. I'll carry on. So where was I saying? Kind of like the first store now, decrypt later attack. If you capture traffic to a vulnerable server, it could be decrypted easily using the stolen key. I'm not sure on timelines, but I think Heartbleed probably accelerated perfect void secrecy result. And there is nothing like messaging your boss his password to convince someone how serious an issue is. I checked just before the talk, and there are still 12 sites in the Alexa 150,000 that are still vulnerable. So in the rapidly evolving digital landscape, threat of quantum computing looms on the horizon, promising to revolutionize the way we process information. Therefore, also, it's going to revolutionize the way we attack information. Today, I'm going to delve into the store now, decrypt later attack, a strategy that forward-thinking attackers are likely already employing. I'll talk about threats and finally offer a few ways forward for the near term. I want to look at a few examples of how past information remains relevant for many years, though. As an introduction, there was the Panama Papers. This was 40 years of documents released in 2016, implicating politicians and their families in tax avoidance schemes. Many were still in positions of power, or were in even greater positions of power when the release came out, leading to resignations and scandals across many countries. Court cases and fallout are still going on to this day. The company at the centre has ceased trading. Lance Armstrong was a great cyclist, but he used performance-enhancing drugs. Despite being one of the most tested athletes at the time, he still managed to win 7 Tour de France titles and an Olympic gold medal. In 2013, his legacy came to an end with his admission of doping during his time at the top of the sport. He was stripped of his 7 titles and the Olympic gold, in addition to receiving a lifetime ban from most competitive sports. He was also estimated to have lost $75 million in sponsorship in a single day. There was a 9-year gap between his first Tour de France win and the release of this information. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Enron Corporation reported strong financial performance and its stock prices soared. In 2001, after years of fraudulent accounting practices, historical financial data was scrutinized, revealing that Enron had been hiding massive debts and losses through complex off-the-books partnerships and accounting loopholes. This revelation led to one of the largest corporate bankruptcies in US history and the conviction of several top executives. Volkswagen positioned itself as a leader in producing environmentally friendly diesel vehicles, claiming low emission levels that complied with stringent environmental regulations. In 2015, after years of analysis and testing, it was revealed that Volkswagen had installed software in their diesel vehicles to cheat emission tests, making the cars appear much cleaner than they actually were. The historical data from these tests, when reviewed with the knowledge of the cheating software, showed a deliberate pattern of deception. The scandal resulted in massive fines, recalls, and a huge damage to Volkswagen's reputation. In September 1950, an article was published in the British Medical Journal linking smoking to lung cancer and heart disease. Despite many studies and scientific evidence, cigarette manufacturers disputed this as part of an orchestrated conspiracy to salvage cigarette sales. This might seem like a strange set of breaches, but I want to get across the fact that you don't know what a big scandal is ahead of time. The simplest things that you think might have been forgotten can be thrown into the spotlight again. What is happening now that we can't afford to have leak within the next 10 years? What is store now, decrypt later? Today, cybersecurity is the battleground that will be the key discriminator in the great power struggle. Make no mistake, store now, decrypt later is part of that strategy. Store now, decrypt later is a critical element in the global cybersecurity race. Store now, decrypt later involves capturing encrypted data now with the intention of decrypting it once quantum computing becomes powerful enough to break today's cryptographic standards. Understanding this threat from the perspective of an attacker is crucial for developing the strategies and technologies needed to protect our sensitive information both now and in the years to come. People out there are collecting huge haystacks of data in the hope of one day finding the needle in those haystacks. Academic and security researchers are right now creating, collecting, storing large amounts of encrypted data to test cryptographic methods and analyze patterns for potential security threats, while also evaluating how various protocols perform under different network conditions to ensure data protection. Examples of datasets used in such research include TLS fingerprints for operating systems, messaging traffic, mobile applications, and video identification in encrypted networks. I do hope large security firms are out there currently searching for encrypted command and control traffic by analyzing patterns created by common malware. I know that the capability exists to impersonate such malware in terms of beacon interval and message length, etc., so I don't think it would be too hard a task. Collection and storage of this encrypted data for research purposes could pose future risks, particularly if the encryption method used to secure the data are later broken or weakened. This could potentially expose the sensitive information. Much like the advertising networks tracking our behavior, do we know exactly who is storing and trading our encrypted data? Many organizations and cybersecurity professionals tend to be more focused on immediate and tangible threats, such as ransomware, phishing attacks, and data breaches. However, the future threat of quantum decryption is a significant concern. During World War II, the Allies collected access encrypted communications with the hopes of developing future methods for decryption. 80 years later, signals intelligence hasn't changed. Encrypted data needs to be collected now to be useful in the future. Even the threat of traditional cryptography decryption should be considered. During the Starwood and Marriott hotels breach, attackers initially gained access to encrypted databases, but it wasn't until later in the attack that the attackers identified the required keys for decryption. I wonder if the trend for long-lived credit and debit card expiration dates is increasing that risk of disclosure. So if the academics and hackers are storing data, then we can be sure our adversaries are doing the same. In order to prevent devastating leaks in the future, action should be taken as soon as possible. Corporations have long-term sensitive data, but governments have sensitive data requiring protection for an extended time, in many cases over 10 years. Whilst in the commercial world, sensitive information may be less relevant with time, such as a manufacturing process becoming more efficient, leading to smaller processor scales, some government data will remain classified for decades, perhaps even indefinitely, as is the case with nuclear missions. I think it's worth calling out several of the sectors here. National defence is clearly always a high priority, but in today's world climate, this is potentially even more so. I'm reminded of the recent disclosure of German military leaders discussing the use of missiles in Ukraine. Innovation. We have billions tied up in innovation projects. What if sensitive information gets out? And not only have we lost that competitive advantage, but our adversaries have now benefited and are in the same position, potentially an even better position. Could get to market faster due to the slack of regulations. The Department of Justice. There are some really scary personal problems here. Processing of terrorists, witness protection, informants. These have real impacts for real people, not just computer systems. Information might have to be protected, not just for the lifetime of the individual, but potentially their children and families. Nuclear, of course, this information can't ever get out, and as stated, could be classified indefinitely. Health and human services, genomic data. Personalized medicine is almost here, and the opposite, personalized pathogens, has, in a similar manner to quantum computing, been a threat on the horizon. With a breach of genome data for military forces, the potential for abuse is huge and terrifying. Civil servant records may be unglamorous, but every government employee has to have records kept private, most likely past the end of their lifetime. Maybe an impact this is not the same as other areas, but in terms of sheer scale, the amount of humans a breach would touch is enormous. So I'll talk briefly about collection methods. Perhaps the simplest illustration of store now decrypt later would be the use of Wireshark to capture and save packets from your local computer. All other attacks are essentially an extension of this technique. Wiretapping could be as simple as plugging existing network connections through a hub or LAN tap, as I've done many times on penetration tests, or the creation of a dedicated span or mirror port on a compromised switch, gaining access to the traffic of a whole network. I also believe there is a definite risk of a compromised perimeter firewall being able to capture and exfiltrate encrypted information with almost no ability for detection. Recent vulnerabilities with Fortinet and Barracuda prove that remote code execution is frequently possible, and even historical vulnerabilities such as backdoor passwords found in Juno devices could have given an attacker the access required to store now and decrypt later. What a great way to target and collect data too, right at the perimeter. A short amount of research on this topic also surfaced the tool Fortinet firewalls that allows for packet captures to be taken via SSH. This is something that can be done in any office or basement. Remote code execution, dump the traffic and exfiltrate. There's no special equipment or preparation required, just the ability to quickly exploit new vulnerabilities. And they don't even have to be new vulnerabilities. There's probably firewalls out there right now. Wireless attacks are, of course, a great way to collect encrypted information too. Equipment and guides are available online to create open source radio networks. And recently, a pair were arrested in the United Kingdom for using such tools to send spam SMS messages, proving that the means are available to almost anyone to harvest mobile phone data. Similarly, Wi-Fi networks are consistently attacked. In 2018, Russia was found to be attacking the Wi-Fi networks of the chemical weapons watchdog in the Netherlands. Using off-the-shelf hardware, they were collecting data, boarding through a 4G connection. I'm sure whatever they didn't manage to decrypt on the fly is waiting, ready for the right time. To reiterate, these techniques are available now and open to anyone. But how easy is it to target encrypted data? We know that they can capture traffic easily, but can they capture the right traffic at the right time? Will the data still be relevant in a financial, political, or military sense within the estimated 10-year, maybe less, maybe more window before the small but real possibility of a cryptographically relevant computer? How could you possibly target connections that you would like to decrypt? Well, it turns out it's pretty easy. I'd like to introduce everyone to the server name indicator. Once you've captured encrypted traffic and moved it to a location where you can work on it, you begin looking at the data. Among the multitude of handshakes sticks out the very useful server name indicator extension attached as one of the TLS options, including in TLS version 1.3. This is part of RFC 3546. The server name indicator extension was added to communicate to a server which host name the client requested outside of the encryption handshake. So this was to allow a single server to be able to present and host multiple certificates from multiple websites. Key points are that the server name indicator is unencrypted and can be used for traffic profiling, surveillance, or for targeting these attacks. Traffic analysis also poses significant risks to privacy, security, and organizational integrity. In traffic analysis, methodical interception and examination of communications is used to extract information from patterns in communication, even when the actual content of the communication may be in. Dangers of traffic analysis are multifaceted and can have serious implications for privacy, revealing metadata and business intelligence leaks, which can be used for corporate espionage. Again, this is without decrypting. This is just from the information captured as it travels across networks. I think a key point to reflect upon is that the SNI extension was called out by the IETF authors as perhaps the most sensitive unencrypted information in TLS version 1.3. Who or what uses the server name indicator though? Well, SharePoint and the services that back off data to SharePoint, such as OneDrive. Some quick stats to SharePoint usage. 85% of the Fortune 500 uses it. UK, USA, Canadian, Australian governments. Over 200 million users relied on SharePoint as of 2020. Office 365, of course, requires connectivity to the internet, and this includes the government community cloud. If you could find and decrypt this traffic, it would be big news and a great help. A good point to be made here is if you asked me to split a huge amount of data into two parts, I'd choose to segregate based on Microsoft 365 and its associated applications. This is a Western phenomenon using SharePoint. I've no doubt that there are similar issues with Russian and Chinese traffic, and I'd love to try and find out one day. But if you kept everything that went to a Microsoft 365 or Azure IP address, you've just massively reduced the amount of data you need to review for potential targets of decryption. You don't even need to decrypt it for this either. The haystack of encrypted communication gets smaller the more you look at it. So I propose the following steps. Number one, find the target. Number two, check for any encryption weaknesses that might accelerate decryption. Number three, collect the data by any means possible. Now, please note for the rest of this presentation, I'm not picking on Microsoft or SharePoint. There are no doubt more vulnerabilities out there and plenty of other products. However, this is just the first one I found. So this is step one. Pretty easy. You can pretty much guess the tenant name for most companies. This is then used in the server name indicator extension field to ensure that Microsoft can correctly route authentication and data traffic. So highlighted in blue here, you can see the server name indicator extension for just a few high profile companies. Again, I'm not singling anyone out. These are just what I found first. Now, from that huge amount of encrypted data I've been hopefully collecting for years, I could pull out a single SharePoint site, perhaps even from a specific time or place, if I've been prepared enough to record that information. Step two, I've investigated the TLS configuration of the identified SharePoint servers. Here we can see that there's 4 weak combinations presented. Now, there are no guarantees that these 4 would be chosen. After all, there are client and server preference lists. But it perhaps would be worth reviewing those connections to see if any connections have been made using these weak ciphers. You could then check to see if they could be attacked sooner rather than later. So I haven't been brave enough to do a live demo, but I did do some homework and illustrated the potential over the next few slides. So I've got my SharePoint site open on the right-hand side with the trusty Wireshark installed and running on the left. This was capturing all traffic, and I've pulled out a relevant stream for the purpose of this demo. You can also search really easily on the SNI extension field. Creating a list of SNI extensions that have been harvested in encrypted data would be trivial too if you had a huge amount to trawl through. I've called out requests containing the server name indicator field and highlighted the fully qualified domain name. This clearly indicates the tenant and therefore the company. Suddenly it seems a whole lot more reasonable to expect encrypted traffic to be targeted before decryption. Second image, I've opened a document on the right-hand side through my OneDrive account, and again highlighted the server name indicator field. The eagle-eyed among you may notice that the FQDN is slightly different. I'm not sure as to why there are slight differences. I think it might be related to the program that is accessing the data. OneDrive seems to use the tenant name -my.sharepoint.com. Further traffic analysis would perhaps be possible on this field to detect between SharePoint and OneDrive access. What I want to illustrate here is that for the initial sync of a document, perhaps someone has sent you a file, the whole file is downloaded from the cloud. If you have a local copy, then that will be loaded from the cache and you wouldn't see the internet traffic for the document. We've not investigated the process for initial uploads of documents. I would presume that the creation of a new blank document would be uploaded quickly, and from there incremental updates would be sent, but I don't know what they would look like. Copying in a large file would probably send the whole file as a single chunk, making retrieval easier. To simulate the ability of a future attacker to decrypt this data, I created a certificate and installed it onto the host's trust store, therefore allowing me to decrypt the traffic in real time. Interestingly, this would also be possible for an adversary with control over a certificate pre-installed into the host or browser store. Did anyone else read about the Chrome removing Entrust from their trusted root cert store? That's one of the problems with public key infrastructure. I had to run the traffic through a proxy, forwarding the decrypted traffic out to a remote PCAP port. Here you can see in the top left, Wireshark is going to the port and reading the decrypted traffic from a local server. This is just how I got it working. The text document on the right can be seen in the traffic. Here is a simple HTTP response. Word documents contain all the data of the file. Obviously, they're just much more messy to view, and a simple text file is great for this demonstration. One of the options for a fix is to wrap all TLS traffic with a symmetric key. Here, I've got a demonstration of such wrapping where there is no information available to an adversary, no handshakes to fingerprint, no metadata to analyze, no patterns to learn, just an encrypted stream of traffic. A new network adapter is created on the host, and all traffic bound for Office 365 is forwarded via this adapter and wrapped with a symmetric key. Data is then sent to the Azure cloud, where it is unwrapped and forwarded to the original destination. I've no reason to believe that forwarded traffic would go outside of the boundaries of Azure, so it should be reasonably trusted. certainly the risk profile could be a whole lot smaller than having the data routed over the internet for anyone to capture. I guess there are some downsides to this. If you work out what the IP address is, you would be able to work out what clients or locations were using the service, but you shouldn't have a clue as to what was going on within it. I'd definitely be interested to apply some of the academic techniques for video detection, etc., to this encrypted stream to see if the same pattern still held true. Although seeing as you control the process, you could also introduce delays, padding, etc., as required for full analysis techniques. That's obviously something for a future presentation. I'd like to almost end with the opinions of the Netherlands National Communications Security Agency. If you need to be secure now, option 1 is to wrap in a symmetric key. Option 2 is to use both post-quantum and traditional cryptography in a hybrid construction. Although, as I'll call out on the slide here, NCSC, which is the National Cyber Security Centre in the UK, have called out IKEv2 as not suitable for this solution. And their very serious option 3 is to consider taking the system offline. It's an old joke, but it may well be true in this case. And then some takeaways. First, everything I've done here, I've shown here, can be done from an office or basement with minimal investment. A couple of $100 and you could be capturing traffic from mobile phones and Wi-Fi networks. This doesn't require $1 billion submarine to tap optical cables. Do we really know who is capturing our data? There are no regulations on this, and are academics capturing private data by design or accident, thereby putting the info at risk of potential disclosure? Second, storage is cheap and getting cheaper. You can store as much as you like for as long as you like, until you are ready to attack or use it. How much has the rest of the world been storing? Are people trading encrypted data? Would someone trade 500 terabytes of data from one country for another? Or would you trade one company for another? Finally, you don't need to decrypt everything for the information to be useful. There is at least one way, the server name indicator extension, to narrow down the amount of traffic you have to decrypt to find that needle in the haystack. There are going to be others. Who will find that way? And will we have wrapped everything with symmetric keys before that happens? Thank you very much. I do hope that you have found this informational. I think we've still got some time left, so I am happy to take questions.
Thank you, Phil. We probably just have a minute or so for maybe one question. Any takers? Okay, well, let's thank the speaker and appreciate your time, Phil.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right, and now I'll introduce our next speaker, Manfred van Willich from Quantum Bridge. Manfred has been a lead system architect and cybersecurity professional at Quantum Bridge, based in Ontario. His focus has been on information theoretic security solutions. His earlier experience included embedded system consultancy and cryptography of digital video and broadcast systems, and a security architect at Qualcomm before being attracted to the world of startups. So with that, I'm ready to turn it over to Manfred to speak to us on distributed symmetric key establishment.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to basically just present a protocol we produced. Whoops, seems to be going a little bit far. Okay, so I'm just going to basically take us to a low level of the protocol. I'm not going to work into the background, the context. We all know symmetric key forms fills a niche of in the cryptographic world where we need symmetric, asymmetric, etc. This is a particular protocol which addresses a need. You'll see how it gets used. So this is the overview. I'll take you into it. So by way of motivation, it fits the quantum threat. It's a fully information theoretically secure protocol. It has, like any symmetric system, it comes with a cost of keying agents, just like Kerberos and similar. It does not have the shortcoming of Kerberos where you have to have a single trusted entity. So you don't need to fully trust. So it forms that balance through sharing. Appreciate key systems come with a huge cost. They're slow, they're clumsy. So we get around that problem. You'll see in a moment. Okay, so what do? Alice and Bob wish to speak to each other. Getting keys between them was a challenge. And we want to be able to address a scenario where someone has active access to all your communication, and your central entities, your trusted entities, cannot be fully trusted. So what we do is we looked for something which was simple, provably secure, and makes a minimum set of security assumptions, essentially those around a threshold sharing scheme. And for this, we get robustness, security, scalability, and it's dynamic, unlike the typical PSK schemes. So what this protocol does is we start off, well, I'm taking you through a second state of the protocol here. First, you establish star network. What the protocol does is, given a star network of trusted entities, semi-trusted entities, and any number of clients, you want to be able to generate a mesh network where you can dynamically establish keys in a split second. And that's what we do. So here, again, we've got two phases. Your slow number one phase, initially distribute keys or random data, which is a slow process, cumbersome, you establish identities. Once you have that, number two is a simple message forwarding scheme, and you have either for storage, long-term storage, or for immediate communication, you have keys that you can reuse. So, I can skip this one. This is just background definitions. So first stage, again, client onboarding. I don't think I should go into that. It just establishes the first phase. Now this is just an overview of the whole protocol. So we have semi-trusted entities in the middle, the keying agents. You do not have to trust all of them. You just have to trust a threshold number of them will follow and do what they're required to do. They will retain the confidentiality, and enough of them will be active. So, and basically that's what this is all about, is how do we compose this protocol out of the primitives we have? So we start, simple Chimere sharing is well known to everyone and well understood. From that, we use one-time pad encryption. So throughout we use one-time keys, gives us information theoretic security. Then a one-time, an information theoretic, it applies to both sides. Authentication means, again, guaranteed authentication. You don't have to worry about the theory behind it. It's all sound, basically unbreakable. Then the new part in this protocol is an additional primitive which is built out well, on top of the other primitives. But I don't believe this has been published in any particular form before this protocol, which is the end-to-end validation in such a fashion that your keying agents, unless they collude, can neither break the authentication, nor can they break any authentication, despite Alice and Bob never having spoken to each other before. All they need to do is have a sufficiently large set, or a sufficient set that both of them trust, of the keying agents in the middle. So, first primitive, one-time bad encryption, everyone knows that. This is just the additive cipher. And here I've just depicted it to give you a sense of my diagramming. These are just 128-bit words that you see here, just a string of them. You use confidential data to encrypt, confidential random data to encrypt confidential data, which can then produce ciphertext, which can then decrypt at the other end, provided you've got the same confidential random data at the other side. Walter Wegman basically built on a polynomial hash, which also been in the literature for a long time. One-time key has strong security properties, provided you adhere to that. Then the implementation, it actually works over, part of your data can be confidential, some of it can be public. It does not affect the security of the protocol, of the primitive. And you just build these together. Sharing scheme, authenticator plus OTP then gives you the channel connection with authentication and confidentiality between the hubs or the central agents and the endpoints separately on the two links. Shamir sharing, everyone should know this, just the security properties. Again, the string of data, you split it up into multiple shares. As long as you can trust each of a threshold number. So let's say you've got a 2 out of 3 sharing scheme. You only need to assume that a few of them, the threshold, are not colluding or compromised in any way. Then self-validated sharing. This is the one novel feature in this protocol. We want to get authentication end-to-end, but the two parties have not ever shared any secret data before. And you cannot get it across in a typical sharing scheme, because any data moving across needs to be authenticated. And so you can't get your key through without some form of authentication. So what we do here is we achieve the same based on the same assumptions as Shamir sharing, that a number of the parties, the intermediaries, will act in a trusted fashion, not more than a certain number are compromised. And so here's where the data depiction comes in. You need to get your key across, which is the yellow portion. We can use secret sharing and one-time, well, secret sharing at this stage. I'm not showing the encryption yet. Use secret sharing to ensure that the data gets to the other side. So Bob gets your key that you're using for your authentication. You use the same shares to send any confidential data, and of course you can transmit directly any associated data that is not confidential without the need to share it. So, and using this key on the data, the whole set of data, you can then produce a tag that you can transmit. Now you need to be able to do it in such a way that anyone who can So for example, if the threshold is K shares, if any one of those intermediaries corrupts, so Bob receives K shares, if one of those intermediaries corrupts the key in the meantime, he's got a way of generating a related key attack, because he can make a known difference in the resulting key from Shamir sharing, and we need to protect against that. So here we have basically some requirements. It has to be reconstructed over a finite field. It requires 3 of the elements of the finite field, which in our case is 128 bits each. And they must have the usual randomness properties. And we need the Shamir sharing scheme having channel, where we have semi-trusted confidentiality in each of them. And this allows us, with the right construction, which we've proven, it needs the Shamir sharing and the authentication algorithm using the polynomial hash, with the additional, normally you would need only 2 elements to create for a key for such a hash. We need a 3rd one, and provided the Shamir sharing scheme is married very closely to the authentication algorithm, you can then prove that you can get the same properties. No intermediary who can manipulate a share, even though it's one of the only ones available to Bob, can then attack and generate a different ciphertext, plain text, that has any higher than a negligible chance of being accepted by Bob. And that's about it. Brings me to the end of it. So any questions you might have?
Questions?
So this is super interesting. I wonder why you use the Carter-Wegman though, instead of, some other kind of tag on the encrypted data. I remember reading that paper long ago, but I can't recall too much about it. So why did you choose that instead of some other authenticator?
It had the necessary properties. I knew how to prove the properties it had. I did not go through a big comparison. I found something which did the job perfectly well enough, fully information theoretically secure, and so on. It was a solution to my problem. So I'd be interested in any alternative, of course. But yeah.
Other questions? I have a quick question. I'm just curious. I know we've got a talk this afternoon on just formal verification, and I was curious if you could maybe speak a little bit more about what you used for the formal security proofs.
No, well, it's not a formal proof in the sense that we validated it using software or anything like that. It's a proof in the sense that we wrote up the exact logic, the probabilities of any particular choices made by the attacker. So it's a standard cryptographic proof system. It was validated independently, in fact, by Evolution Q.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, then let's thank our speaker. All right, so in this session, we've got one more speaker before lunch. David Zhao. David Zhao is the professor in the Faculty of Mathematics at the University of Waterloo, a member of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Institute, an affiliated member of the Institute of Quantum Computing, and the chief cryptographer at EvolutionQ. So with that, I'll turn it over to David. He's going to talk to us today about quantum secure end-to-end key establishment using multi-mode cryptography.
All right, thanks, Roberto. Okay. So I'm going to talk about a new protocol that we invented here at EvolutionQ. We call it multimodal cryptography. And the idea here is that we're aiming to sort of use all of the tools that we have at our disposal. We have things like obviously post-quantum cryptography, also classical public key cryptography, and the subject of this workshop, symmetric key cryptography. We can roll all of these together sort of into one protocol, which has certain advantages, as you see, but that we think is worth looking into. So with our protocol, we think about how do we do key agreement today, right? Well, we have obviously asymmetric cryptography, the sort of normal way that people do key agreement these days. And asymmetric or public key cryptography is great. It's really, really great. I don't think anybody here, even at this workshop, wants to take the position that we should just throw it all away and do symmetric key only or something like that. Public key, certainly been responsible for a lot of these real world security benefits that we see on the internet today. It's something that we very much like to keep. But on the other hand, there are some things that may make you pause a little bit about public key cryptography, especially in the post-quantum setting where the algorithms are still maturing. And I'm not here to say that well, maybe lattices are going to get broken tomorrow or something like that. I don't think that's exactly the concern, but a more pertinent concern is perhaps that maybe we don't know the right parameter sizes or something like that, right? Back in, imagine transporting yourself back in 1989. I don't know if you were still alive there. I was alive in 1989, and back then, the recommendation was, I remember clearly it was, oh, use RSA 512. It will be secure for as long as you need it, right? And it turns out that advice is not accurate today. And the reason isn't because RSA got broken. Maybe it did in some ways, but it didn't. The core protocol didn't get broken. The problem is that 512 bits is not enough these days, but we didn't know that back then, right? So these things can change over time, and the parameter sizes that we use now might not be the right ones, right? So that's sort of one area of risk that public key cryptography entails. But in any case, there is a role, I think, for incorporating symmetric key cryptography into our key agreement protocols, but without throwing away the public key cryptography. We want to sort of keep the best of both worlds, right? Now, as far as symmetric key cryptography is concerned, there are ways to do key agreement using symmetric key cryptography. That's the whole point of this workshop. Even back in the old days, we had things like Kerberos or so on, right? But with symmetric key cryptography, there's a few drawbacks there as well. It's as mentioned in Manfred's talk, it's clunky, it's cumbersome, it's hard to get forward secrecy, it's hard to do key management. And so on, right? And so what we're looking at is this idea where we can perhaps we can combine both, right? So we can use both symmetric key cryptography and public key cryptography. Now, there's already a name for that. So, well, there are various names for that, but I think the one that we use these days, we call it hybrid cryptography, where, well, maybe hybrid sometimes refers to different combinations, right? Like if you're talking about post-quantum, then hybrid might mean combining classical and post-quantum cryptography together, right? But then there's also a sort of version of hybrid where you might think about combining, public key cryptography and symmetric key cryptography together, right? So hybrid is a part of it, certainly. And, we can do that. And there are other protocols that, aim for, some sort of hybrid, TLS, as was mentioned in a previous talk, and so on, right? But we'd like to, do a little bit more. We want to also think about how do you sort of deploy this? How do you, use this in a network? And with public key cryptography, our solution right now is we use PKIs. We use public key, infrastructure to bootstrap the public keys and make sure that people get the right public keys, right? Well, how do you make sure that people get the right symmetric keys? That's a difficult question as well. It's not addressed by mere hybridization, right? You need something more than that. And so our proposal is to have a network of trusted hubs, right? So we call them key distribution hubs, which form a key distribution network. Now, in Manfred's talk, he talked about distributing trust over a bunch of nodes in a threshold fashion. We see these approaches as complementary. It's not a case of one or the other, or one is better than the other. All of these, I think, have a role in the quantum safe future. Okay, and of course, if you want, you can also layer quantum key distribution on top of that, as either as a means of generating the symmetric keys themselves or securing the links between entities. I'm not going to get into that. That's not the main point of this talk. I want to focus on the symmetric key cryptography aspects. All right, so first a few definitions here. By entity, we mean either an endpoint like a user or a KDH. So KDHs, the key distribution hubs that distribute the symmetric keys, they also have their own keys and they can register with the network just like everybody else. And so in some cases, we want to treat them like regular users. In other cases, we don't. Okay? We're going to, in our protocol, use public keys as identifiers. So we're going to identify entities by their public keys, sidestepping kind of the question of, which key is Alice's and which key is Bob's, or, whatever. We're just going to say, we assume that somebody's key and that's how you identify them. We're not solving the sort of PKI problem directly. We assume that, you have the right public keys for the right parties, and that, solving that problem is beyond the scope of our protocol. So in our protocol, we have an enrollment step, which you'll see in the sort of next slide. So this step 0 here, that's enrollment. Okay. So this enrollment step is something that we also consider, in a sense, to be out of the scope of our protocol. We're assuming that you have some way to enroll all of your endpoints with all of your entities, either endpoints or KDHs, that all of your entities enroll with a key distribution hub, right? So that the enrollment happens in some way. We're not going to worry too much about how that happens. There are various ways that you can do enrollment. You can use, a temporary sort of physical secure link. You can use a PKI if you like. You can use anything in between or some combination of them. But we do assume that every entity has enrolled securely with the KDH and the KDN beforehand. Okay. So once you have everybody safely enrolled, then you can get on with the protocol. So the steps of the protocol are when you want to communicate with somebody. Let's say Alice wants to communicate with Bob, right? So the first step is Alice has to link with the key distribution network, right? So Alice has to talk to her KDH, her key distribution hub, establish a secure link with her KDH, and then from her KDH, Alice is going to get a piece of what we call pre-key data for Bob. It's a sort of, piece of data that Alice can then use to establish a link with Bob. And so this step, yes, it has to happen online, but it doesn't have to happen sort of immediately before Alice gets derives a shared key with Bob. You can separate those two stages. You can have a sort of it's not pre-computation, but pre-retrieval step where you get the pre-key data first and then use it later. So Alice is going to get pre-key data for Bob, and then Alice can use that pre-key data to then communicate with Bob and establish a shared key, and that shared key sort of has combines all of the security benefits of all of the things that we're throwing into this pot, right? So it's there's a classical public key agreement, there's post-quantum key agreement, and there's a symmetric key agreement, sort of all rolled into one. Okay. And we also take care to make sure that forward secrecy is achieved by updating the key as we go along and throwing away the past values, so that if state is ever compromised, the store and decrypt attack doesn't work, for example. Okay. All right, so with respect to the detailed protocol steps, so here is the first step in the protocol. That would be step one right there. Okay, so here's step one. These slides might be sort of a bit much to absorb technically, on the spot, but we do have a white paper. It's posted on our website. I've got the link on the last slide. You can go download the technical white paper where you'll see all of these diagrams there as well, right? But so to establish a link, what we do is we have a link secret that was sort of agreed upon in advance. This is the sort of enrollment step. During the enrollment step, we establish a link secret. We establish a there's something else that we establish. Where is it? I actually don't see it here. Where is it? It's the authentication sort of secret. So a link secret and the authentication secret are established during the enrollment phases. But they're established sort of to start with, but then you keep updating them, right? So sorry, I'm not used to the buttons here on this remote. So when you run through the protocol, you're going to be updating these secrets here at the end, so that they'll get sort of updated and rolled over to ensure forward secrecy. So the point of sort of the link establishment is, you talk to your KDH, and at the end of this, you have an updated link secret that you can use, and you have a sort of link key that you can use to then perform authenticated encryption with your KDH. Okay, so that's the sort of first step to get off the ground. Is you want for an endpoint to be able to talk to the KDH, right? Or a KDH to be able to talk to another KDH. You want to establish a link that you can use to talk to them to get, let's say you want Bob's data. Well, then it has to go sort of this way through the network. And so you want links established to make sure that all of that data can flow in encrypted fashion. Now, all of this only uses symmetric key cryptography here. There's no sort of public key cryptography here. We assume that when you enroll, sort of you've set up a pre-shared key to allow you to talk to the KDH in that way. Okay. So here's the pre-key data that we use in order. So when Alice wants to talk to Bob, Alice will talk to the key distribution network and obtain a sort of block of pre-key data that Alice can use to establish an end-to-end key with Bob. Right. So this pre-key data is over here. It's got the ID of Alice, the ID of Bob's KDH, a sort of secret that Bob shares with his KDH, and this MAC, which sort of is used to authenticate all of this information. Okay. And all of this data is sent using these encrypted links. So the workflow is Alice talks to her KDH, which might not be Bob's KDH, but then her KDH will then talk to Bob's KDH and get the pre-key data and relay that over to Alice. Okay, so that's the get pre-key data step. Once you get the pre-key data, you can then use it. You don't have to be online with the KDN in order to use it. You have to be online with Bob, but you don't have to be online with the KDN anymore, right? And finally, there's the step where Alice wants to establish an end-to-end key with Bob. And so this step is where we throw in the public key cryptography as well. So if you look here, there's hybrid AKE init, hybrid AKE response. That is the hybrid AKE finalized. Those are the only places here where we use public key cryptography. All right. And we already say hybrid here. And the reason we say hybrid here is because we're imagining in our protocol, we specify that key exchange is already a hybrid of a classical scheme and a post-quantum public key scheme. Okay, and then everything else here is sort of symmetric key cryptography, right? And again, we update the keys. We have max to make sure that everything is validated and so on. And at the end, you get an end-to-end key, and that end-to-end key is the key that Alice uses to talk to Bob. Right? So you do this. You have an end-to-end key between Alice and Bob, but all of that infrastructure is just there so that Alice, you don't have to set up these keys in advance with all of the million people that you want to talk to. You just have to set up an enrollment procedure once with your key distribution hub, and then you can go on the network and sort of look up anybody else that you want. Okay, so that's the protocol itself. Again, if you want more details, there's a white paper at the end. You can look in there for all of the technical details. And we have a security proof, right? So that we have a proof now. As what Manfred was just saying. So our proof is, it's a standard cryptography proof. It's not like, formalized in, some sort of formal verification software. But we have written it up. It is included in the white paper. Please take a look. It's not peer reviewed yet, but it's been reviewed by me, and I can tell you it's good. All right, I know how to do proofs. In key exchange protocols, we typically have models that look a lot like, for example, the ECK model, this extended kinetic write check. This is a standard security model that you use to evaluate key agreement protocols in the public key space, right? And so what ECK looks like is, I hope this is a review, but maybe it's not. You have an adversary that sort of controls all the parties, right? And the challenger sort of, does what the adversary wants, basically, right? If the adversary wants to create a party, create a public key, initiate a key exchange or something like that, the challenger will do all of these things on behalf of the adversary. And then the sort of, core of the protocol is the adversary eventually is going to say, I would like to be tested on this session. A session is like a key establishment, right? So the adversary says, I want to be tested on this session. Please test me. And the sort of content of the test is the challenger will give the adversary a key, which is one of two things. It's either the real key for that session or it's a random bit string, okay? And the job of the adversary is to determine which of these two things occurred. Did the challenger give me the real key, or did the challenger give me a random bit string? All right, so you have to like distinguish between the real key and a random bit string. And there's certain sort of capabilities that you allow the adversary to, possess, right? So the adversary can, in fact, simply reveal keys for sessions. You can say, please tell me the key for that session, and so on, right? The adversary can corrupt parties. The adversary can, please tell me the private key for this party, and so on, right? So you give the adversary certain capabilities, but you have some restrictions as to which capabilities the adversary can use in which times, right? So, I mean, there's the obvious, right? So obviously you can't test a session and then reveal the secret key for that session. That would be trivial, right? Then you could just you could just win automatically, right? So there's certain rules like that. So we have this idea of what we call a fresh session, where the adversary has not like logically compromised the session key and for the test session, right? Note that the adversary can still do things like compromise the private key of the parties involved in the session, right? So they can still do that. They just can't reveal the session key that they're being tested on. right? So that's the ECK model. It's one of the standard models that people use to evaluate the security of key exchange protocols. And so in our setting, we adapt this model slightly. So we have this thing that we call the multimodal ECK security model. And in multimodal, we give the adversary, additional capabilities, right? So we want to model this idea where the asymmetric private keys might be insecure. So we give the adversary the capability to break all the asymmetric private keys. And then we need a sort of different definition of fresh so that the adversary, can't trivially, win the security game in this security model. So our modifications then lead to this concept of sessions being either sim-fresh or asim-fresh. So sim-fresh means like fresh with respect to the symmetric key, that the symmetric key component of the key exchange has not been trivially compromised. And then asim-fresh refers to the public key or asymmetric key component, that component has not been trivially compromised, okay? So we have this these two definitions, sim-fresh and asim-fresh. And we have security theorems, right? So our security theorems are, so the first theorem is that if you have an adversary that can win against an asim-fresh session in the multimodal ECK security model, then in your original, AKE, there must be an adversary that can break that key exchange protocol under the ordinary ECK, security model. And similarly, if you have an adversary that can break a sim-fresh session, then there must exist, at least one adversary that can either break the encryption, part of the AEAD, or the authentication part of the AEAD, or the authentication property of the MAC, right? So these are the two theorems that we have, and with these inequalities to quantify the sort of advantage that the adversary has in all of these cases, right? So those are our theorems. I'll sort of run through just sort of a high-level overview of how one of these security proofs go, just because it's you might as well go through a proof while we can, right? So here's the proof of the first theorem, right? So suppose that you have an adversary that can sort of win the sort of test query game in the multimodal ECK, security model using an asim-fresh session. Okay, so a session where they haven't broken the public key or the private key parts, the public private key parts of the protocol. Well, in this case, so we have an adversary. We'll call that adversary M. Okay, so like M is the multimodal adversary, right? And then we're gonna do a security reduction, right? So we're gonna create an adversary A that can break the sort of normal, key exchange, the AKE under ECK, right? So we're gonna create our own adversary. Now, normally what you would do is you would just take whatever M does in their game and then do the same thing in your game, except that in your game, you see, in your game, you have a somewhere in here, you have an AKE, protocol over here, and you're going to use that to derive a public key, based key agreement. We call this S sub AB, right? That's our sort of key agreement that we use. Let's say we have a classical AKE, right? So SAB is like the classical AKE part of this scheme, okay? So we assume that, we have a multimodal adversary that's doing everything. And what we're going to do is we're just going to set up the same parties. We're going to set up the same sessions. And we're going to sort of invent out of thin air everything else, right? All the symmetric keys we choose ourselves. All of the other things in this protocol, we choose everything ourselves, except for the sort of public key sort of AKE. That part we're going to relay to our own game. Okay, so we're just going to pass everything along. And normally that's a very easy sort of proof to do. There is one thing, however, that prevents us from doing this entirely straightforwardly, and that is right here underneath this step here. Right here, the MAC. You need to take this sort of kconf, this sort of confirmation key, you need to MAC it, and you need to send the MAC as part of the protocol, okay? And so that means that you actually need to know what the kconf is during the execution of protocol. You can't just like relay this to your game and then defer the sort of calculation of kconf until until it's revealed. Let's say you need to know this. You need to know this on the spot in order to be able to compute the MAC. And so because of that, because of this dang MAC, it turns out that in our security proof, you need to guess in advance which session M is going to test you on, because you need to have the MACs available. And so you need to, when you have a test session, you need to do something, right? You need to do something, special with your test session in order to, pass along the test. But because you need to compute the MAC of the confirmation key before knowing whether that session is going to be a test session, it turns out that you need to sort of guess in advance which of the sessions is going to be your test session. And so, well, that need to guess sort of is where we have this sort of factor. We lose this factor, in advantage. Like as far as a security proof goes, it's still fine. It's a polynomial factor, but it's going to be, a loss of efficiency of, a certain number, a factor involving the number of sessions that are created, right? So because you need to guess in advance sort of which session is going to be the right one, and you might not guess correctly, right? Your probability of success is like 1 over the number of sessions, essentially, or something like that, right? So you'll lose that much like tightness, I guess, in the advantage. But the rest of the proof sort of goes through. These are very standard proofs in the key exchange world. That's just to give you some idea, of what these proofs look like. So then once you have, multimodal ECK security, you get a bunch of sort of related properties essentially for free, because the multimodal ECK security model is strong enough to imply all of these other properties. And this is very similar to how the ECK security model gives you all sorts of properties for free, right? Like forward secrecy or key compromise impersonation or whatever, right? So all of those come for free because the model is sort of chosen to be powerful enough to imply all of the other properties. So here we get a bunch of properties for free. I've listed them here. There's a little subtlety here in that when we say something like strong computational security versus computational security, what we mean here is computational security means sort of public key security, and strong computational security means like one-way function security or something like that, right? And then we also have information theoretic security in some cases as well. So those are all of the notions that we use, and these are all described in the white paper. So speaking of which, here's sort of some links that we have. I think for this crowd, you might be most interested in the technical white paper. That's here at the last link over here. If you go to the first link, the product page, you will get links to all of these. Now, be aware there are 2 white papers. One of them is the marketing white paper. One is the technical white paper. You probably want the technical white paper. That's the one with all of the, security models and definitions and proofs, right? So please feel free to explore. And, if you have any questions, you can, of course, ask them here, or, find me afterwards. I'll be happy to talk about it.
Thank you, David. Questions? I got a couple just very simple questions. I'm just trying to understand it for the servers that are your key distribution hubs.
Yeah.
Those are just your basic, like a basic server
Yeah.
in the cloud?
So
Okay.
we imagine that everything in the circle is a KDH, and then everything outside of the circle is a regular endpoint.
Okay. Another just sort of clarifying question. The endpoints, if they are denied access to the server, can they still talk to each other? Can they pair with a different server?
Yeah, okay. So I think in what we have written up so far, we do assume that each endpoint associates itself with one KDH. But a KDH can also, in a certain sense, act as an endpoint in the, we call them entities when we want to blur the distinction between those two, because a KDH has to talk to other KDHs in order to, relay traffic and so on. And you'll notice even in our diagram here, we do allow KDHs to sort of mesh together, that it doesn't have to be a tree in that case. I suppose there's nothing stopping us from having one endpoint associate itself with multiple KDHs within the network. I don't see any problem with that. It's just not something that we've thought of in advance. Now, your question of whether one endpoint can talk to another endpoint directly, they can once step 2 is done. Okay, so you need to do step 2, get the pre-key data, and then afterwards you can reach out sort of directly to the other party, but not before then.
And then your endpoints don't need to re-verify with the servers?
Right. So then the only case where you need to talk to the KDN is when you want to initiate that conversation with some other party. If Alice wants to initiate with Bob, Alice has to go to the KDN to get the pre-key data for Bob. Bob does not have to go back to the KDN and once Alice reaches out to him. All right. Bob does have to enroll with the KDN. Like there has to be an enrollment step at the beginning, right? But there doesn't have to be a step afterwards where Bob reaches back into the KDN.
Thank you. Let me ask one more question. Just on in the previous talk that Manfred gave, he was talking about integrating with 8784, and I'm just curious: is this protocol sort of its own thing, or does it work with IPsec or 8784? Is that?
I think
Just curious.
I don't actually know all the RFCs, but I think that many of them are sort of either at the stage or are beginning to get to the stage where they're sort of incorporating pre-shared keys into the workflow. IPsec has had pre-shared keys since forever. I know that. TLS, I think, is now, at least thinking about putting in pre-shared keys and things like that, right? So anytime you have an RFC with a pre-shared key, you can use this to get the pre-shared key and put it right in. Right? So that's I think the cleanest sort of way to combine this with anything RFC based.
Very nice. Any last questions?
In your multimodal ECK model,
Yeah.
where you said that, that first bullet where you allow the adversary to get all present and future asymmetric private keys, is that including both classical and post-quantum
Yes.
keys?
Yes, that
Okay.
is that we are assuming that all public key cryptography is broken. That may be a pretty drastic assumption, but just for the purposes of making sure that the symmetric layer does provide adequate redundancy, we do sort of model that in our security model.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
I just want to ask about the trust level. When Alice talks to Bob, she needs to trust 2 key delivery entities.
Yeah.
She needs to, is it limited to 2, and do they need to trust both of them fully?
I haven't thought about the level of trust. Okay, so I do know that, because our security model, is what it is, we've gone through a proof that once you have sort of established the link, you don't need trust in the KDN at that point. Once you've done everything, even once you've gotten here, once you've gotten past step 2, you can break the KDN, you can break the KDHs, get all of their long-term secrets, and you're still fine, because at this point the secret has been updated, it's been rolled over, and the old ones have been thrown away. Right? You've updated the secret and you've discarded the previous secret. That's part of the protocol. You're supposed to discard those. Okay, so that we have that sort of forward secrecy with respect to the KDH, that you can compromise the KDH after the pre-key data has been obtained, and it won't affect further security. But prior to that, yes, you need to trust. What do you need to trust? You need to trust the KDH that you are enrolled with, the KDH that Bob is enrolled with, And if there are any relays along the way, which there aren't in this diagram, but if there were, then you would need to trust all of the relays in those steps, but only for the symmetric key part. The public key part is Alice knows Bob's public key when entities are identified by their public keys, right? So if Alice is talking to Bob, Alice knows Bob's public key. And so you would still have the protection, as it were, of public key agreement, even if all the KDHs were broken.
Okay, great. So you need to compromise two completely different types of vectors
Yeah.
to,
Yes.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Okay, so now we're on lunch break. We'll